Welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoye. The Psychology Talk Podcast is a unique conversation with experts in the field of mental health from around the globe. Topics include hypnosis and mind-body treatments, ethics and cultural diversity, psychotherapy and psychiatry, emerging treatment modalities, and much, much more. While you're listening, please give us a like and subscribe to the show. It helps us to continue to provide excellent programming. And now, here is the episode. Hello, everyone. Today, my guest is Dr. Robin Stern. Dr. Stern is the co-founder and associate director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. She's a licensed psychoanalyst with 30 years of experience treating individuals, couples, and families. She lives in New York City. Dr. Stern is here today to discuss her new book, The Gaslight Effect, a recovery guide. The Gaslight Effect helps readers to identify if they are part of a pattern of emotional abuse in any type of relationship, and it provides tools to stop the abuse and move on with their lives. Dr. Stern, welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast.
Thank you. I'm just trying to adjust the lighting here. It's a little weird.
Well, this is not a video.
Oh, that's right. It's not a video. I forgot.
It's all audio. Yeah, so you can go get in your pajamas if you want. It's okay.
I just got out of my pajamas a few hours ago. So
okay. All right. Well,
I guess it's fine. I don't have to declutter my family pictures in the back.
Nah, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background as a psychologist.
So I'm at Yale now, but my training as an analyst was like totally different and separate than that. I went to NYU, and while I was at NYU, and then I decided to get a doctorate at NYU, but somewhere in the middle of getting my of graduating from college and going to a Ph.D. program, I got a job as a research assistant at Postgraduate Center for Mental Health, working for then the head of the center, Ted Reese, and he was working on he was using the Genlin scale to look at psychotherapy interventions and how emotionally impactful they were.
Eugene Genlin,
who's from Chicago.
From Chicago, yeah. One of my friends and mentors actually did some work with him, studied with him, took some classes with him before he passed. And yeah, there's a lot of research in psychotherapy outcome, but more qualitative stuff that they do down there.
Exactly. Yeah. So I worked on that project. And at the time, I was thinking that I wanted to be a divorce lawyer, and which is why I majored in psychology at NYU. But then as I started to do internships to major in psychology, I realized, no, this is what I want to do. I want to be treating the people. I want to be talking to the people. I don't want to be writing up briefs. And then when I worked at Postgraduate Center, I realized this is really what I want to be doing. And I was particularly interested in what caused divorces and what created those emotional ruptures between people. And so early on, when I was very young, I thought then I should be a divorce lawyer. But of course, as I began to learn more, I realized, no, I want to be a healer, a therapist. And so that's how I started my career in therapy, in training to be a therapist. I was training in those days. You could do it a little bit differently than you can do it now. So I was training at Postgraduate Center at the same time that I was getting my doctoral degree at NYU. And it was, I trained in the individual psychoanalytic department and then the group psychotherapy department. And it just was the right group for me, the right fit.
Okay. Yeah. So do you still consider yourself a purist with regards to psychoanalysis, or are you more integrative? Do you see like recently I got some training in mentalization-based treatment, and I really enjoy that format. So I've integrated that into some of the other work I do with people. But I guess you learned your lesson, and that you have to kind of work with the patient and with the tools you need.
Of course. And then when I started to learn about and work with the skills of emotional intelligence, I realized that which a lot of there's a lot of overlap between teaching and learning emotional intelligence and cognitive behavioral therapy as well. And it's very practical. And so, and emotional intelligence training and education, as we do it, is not therapy at all, although it can be therapeutic if you learn the skills. But what I noticed working at Postgraduate Center for Mental Health and at the Training Institute for Mental Health in New York is that when people have insight, it's often a pivot point, as of course I'm sure you know, but without skills, it's harder to enact in your life the change you want to make. Mm-hmm. So you don't have the skills to manage your own emotions. And now, like thinking about gaslighting and relationships, it's going to be super hard for you to walk away and to opt out of a very difficult power struggle and get away from your gaslighter, or leave a relationship when there's still a big piece that's keeping you hooked. So I've been very, I would say, mindful over the last number of years of the role that building emotion skills can play in behavior change and in healing.
Yeah. Okay. And so, well, I mean, you're here kind of to plug your book, right? And is the Gaslight Effect a recovery guide? Is that a new book, or is it because I know you've done some work and you've done another book, I think, on gaslighting, correct?
Right. So in 2007, as a result of seeing gaslighting emerging in my practice and having an experience in my former marriage with gaslighting, and watching a number of my friends who were otherwise strong, independent women kind of come apart and fragment when they were questioned or by their lovers or husbands, or when they were challenged, and when the gaslighters in their life, which they didn't yet identify as gaslighters, were saying, but that's not true. Or why are you so paranoid? Or what do you mean you couldn't reach me? Like, this is your paranoia. Like, get a grip. And redirecting their attention to some part of the picture that was really unimportant, and ignoring what my friend or colleague would come to them with.
Right. Yeah. Oh, okay. And so you saw this, and this is 2007. This is before, I mean, I think you posted on your blog. I took a peek at that earlier this year or late last year, that 2022, the word of the year was gaslighting. Right? Yes.
So 2007, people weren't really talking about it. And what I think you'll find interesting is that when I tried to do some research, when I did research, what I found was that there were some articles in British journals about how therapists were gaslighting their patients. That, patients would say, I've really gotten everything I needed to get from therapy, and I feel like I'm ready to leave. And the therapist would say, you're not ready. And then the patient would persist, and the therapist would say, no, this is your whatever talking. You're really not ready. And I'm the expert here. And so it was like, beware therapists, don't do this to your patients kind of thing. But I was really doing it writing the book because I felt like if it happened to me, and I'm happy to tell you briefly about my own gaslighting experience, but if it was happening to me and I knew what gaslighting was, and it was happening to my friends who were otherwise strong, confident women, what about people who didn't have access to psychotherapy? What about people who didn't have access to others to talk about this kind of destabilizing, soul-destroying, ego-destroying experience? And so I felt like I needed to write about it. And at the time I was working in a women's leadership institute where there were a number of writers. And so writing a book did not seem like, oh my God, I can't do that. It seemed like, yeah,
that's what you do. Yeah.
I have something to say.
Yeah.
I should write a book about it. So the book came out and it was translated into many languages. And it stayed, I would say, the interest level or the response that I got about that book at that time was from couples, from women in gaslighting relationships. There were, of course, many men who wrote and said men are gaslighted too. Women can be gaslighters too. And then in the run up to the election, which is then 10 years after that, there was a lot of conversation about how the president-to-be or the president-elect was a gaslighter. There was a lot of conversation about how he was gaslighting America. And every interview that I had at that point was, is Donald Trump a gaslighter? When they would include that question. And I would always say, since Yale, people at Yale are nonpartisan, and I didn't want to get into it since I'm not a political pundit. I am psychotherapist, psychoanalyst. And so I would say, this is what I'm an expert in, and this is his behavior. You decide. And so it was during that time that that the publisher reprinted my book. And then I just began hearing more and more from people, please tell me more details about how to get out. I read your book and you must have been sitting in my living room because it totally resonates with me. These are the same words my husband would use. These are the same words my girlfriend would use. And what can you tell me if I can't go to therapy? And so I thought I really wanted to write a guide. So initially the guide was supposed to be, or was meant to be, a companion to the Gaslight Effect book. But as I began to write it, I realized there was more that I wanted to say. Like, for example, I wanted to talk about underlying, what's underlying your like compulsion to join in the vision of your gaslighter. And if it's pathological accommodation, well, what is that? Do you know what I mean? So I wanted to give back into the public readership some of the psychoanalytic concepts that I tried to extract to make it more readable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes that literature can be a bit dense. Yeah. Absolutely. But your book is not. I had a chance to read it, and I enjoyed it. It looked very practical. Luckily, I don't have a situation where I'm in a relationship with a person who gaslights. My wife doesn't do that, and if she were, I think I'd catch it pretty quickly and try to handle things. But I would use your book if I did have that issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very. I can say it's very well written, very clear, and it's like systematic with a chapter describing something and those nice exercises, things you can do to work on your self-esteem and comebacks to kind of set up proper boundaries with people. Yeah. Well, yeah. So you basically the past. I think this is what you're saying. Since about 2016, the term gaslighting has become more popular in society because of certain people involved in politics, and that opening the door for more people to behave in such a way that they can do that. In a way, deflecting, psychological deflection is what politicians use as a technique when they're running for office, right? I mean, it's just like, it's a standard trick to say, oh, my opponent is terrible, vote for me. Mm-hmm. I don't have any negative qualities, or, right. There's no one behind this curtain, the kind of thing. So I think there is a proclivity for politicians to do that naturally. And maybe because of that, maybe that's why a lot of people who go into positions of power can use those techniques more often than not. But that's another conversation probably. Well, what do you think the gaslight effect is? What is the gaslight effect?
Can I just want to respond to what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right about politicians often doing that, and people who are don't want to take responsibility in the moment often doing that. Like, look here, don't look here. No, that's not what's happening. But gaslighting is that extra step where not only are you deflecting, but then you're saying there's something wrong with the way you look at this picture. There's something wrong with the way you think about things. Like, this always happens. That's the piece where not only are you saying my reality is different than your reality, but there's something wrong with you that you hold on to that reality. Yeah. And that's the piece that over time becomes, as I said, soul destroying. And so the gaslight effect, which is a term that I coined, seeing patients in my practice who were suffering in gaslighting relationships over time, really is what happens to you over time when you are the target of gaslighting and you are dancing the gaslight tango and participating in that undermining of self. And even though you may not be consciously participating, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to participate in the gaslight tango. But somehow, because you don't want to alienate the person you love, or you don't want to anger the person who's writing your checks, or you don't want to cause a break, an emotional break, an empathic break between you and the person who you idealize, you will ultimately, as a gaslightee, give up a piece of yourself.
So this is different than just disagreeing with someone in a relationship.
Yes, it is. And thank you for bringing that up. It is. You know as well as I do that disagreeing with somebody can help sharpen boundaries, can ultimately be very productive, can be more learning about the person you're talking to. But if I disagree with you and I say, no, that's not what happened, and you know about yourself, don't you, Scott, that you're so paranoid, right? If you walk away, or you know what, that's whatever that happened, but you're so sensitive. If you're then walking away from that situation, thinking to yourself, I am so sensitive. No wonder she doesn't want to be my friend, or no, I am so sensitive. It's my fault, right? Then that's where you enter that gaslight tango. And some people have said to me, well, are you blaming the victim? Because you're saying gaslightees participate. And my answer is no. I'm trying to enlighten the victim or shine the light on the fact that if you can step into the gaslight tango, you can step out.
Okay. Well, how do you step out? I mean, what are some of the techniques or some of the ways a person can kind of take back control over things?
With difficulty.
Oh, okay.
With difficulty and with self-compassion and patience, I would say that up front. It takes the skills of self-regulation, the commitment to integrity, the willingness to leave the relationship if you have to, knowing in the back of your mind, if this doesn't stop and I'm going to continue to give up pieces of myself, I'm going to have to leave. The ability to opt out of those conversations that don't really go anywhere. The ability to say, wait a minute, let me take a deep breath here. That's not the way I think about it. Or you still didn't answer my question. Or you know what, Scott, I may be sensitive, but you still didn't invite me to that gathering. Like, I asked you about the gathering and you're telling me I'm sensitive. You're shifting the conversation. Or I asked you where you were last night and you didn't answer my question. You just told me about myself. That's called gaslighting.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so, but someone doesn't just like, if you can see the person's gaslighting, you wouldn't get involved in this tango, right? So there must be some kind of slippery slope that takes a person into this kind of one down non-relationship situation with a person who gaslights?
Yes. So I'll use myself as an example. I was married to someone who, if he were here on this podcast, you would think he's a great guy, affable personality, very pleasant. He was a good guy gaslighter. And he was persistently and consistently late, but not 5 minutes late, 15, 20 minutes late. So I'd be making dinner and he would be late. And when I told him that was bothering me or hurt my feelings or I felt disrespected, whatever it was that I had to say about that, his response was always that I had a problem with time. And that I must have learned from my parents that time was more important, that time showed something about people when actually that was not right. And that he was there, and what was I complaining about? And so initially, stage 1 gaslighting, I thought I just dismissed his comments as being ridiculous, untrue, ridiculous. And I was very comfortable saying, no, that it's not okay to be consistently late. It's disrespectful, et cetera, et cetera. Over time, and I was writing the book at the time, or doing research for my book at the time, and seeing it in my practice. But over time, as he was that certain, and he was that consistent and that specific about, this is your problem. Other women don't feel this way about time. Nobody else would feel this way about time. This is your parents teaching you wrong things about time. I began to think, is he right? And even though I knew he wasn't right, I began to think, could he be right? So it's that little opening of, could he possibly be right? And then you can climb into, which fortunately I didn't, climb into a deeper hole about, I can see it from his perspective. He's out working and just, what's the big deal if he's 15 minutes late? So I heat up the food a little bit differently, or I prepare a little bit differently. And, but in stage 2 of gaslighting, of the gaslight effect, when you are defending yourself, when you're constantly like ruminating about the conversation going over and over in your mind, is he right? Am I right? Like, well, let me see. I said this and he said that. That's a pretty, that's a red flag that you're in a gaslighting relationship when you can't get out of that dynamic. And what I say to patients is, well, okay, so is it really important who's right in this situation? Or is it more important, perhaps, how you feel? Because in that situation, like, what are you really fighting about? Okay, so let's agree to disagree. But the gaslighter is not going to let you agree to disagree unless you're willing to walk away. And what I do believe is that in that moment, when you know that the gaslighter is out to manipulate you, you feel it. You know there's something wrong. But it's very hard to break free because also in stage 2, you want to convince him, no, I am that good and loving person. No, I'm not crazy. I'm not paranoid. You see this example and that example and the other example, as if it's not enough that you know you're not paranoid, or that you know you don't have a problem with time, or that you know.
So you have to, you kind of get caught into the sense of defending yourself rather than actually trusting your own instincts.
Exactly right.
And you have more of an other versus self orientation.
Exactly right.
Well, do you think that, and there are probably other stages, right? That's stage 2.
Right. And stage 2 can go on for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third stage is when you have really moved into the shoes of the gaslighter. And you're already seeing yourself as, I'm so paranoid. No wonder things aren't going well. One thing that, just taking a step back from, when I see people who in my office who come in because they're in a troubled relationship, often they're not the same, as you indicated, or as you alluded to a few minutes ago, they're not the same strong self they were early on. So they're already in a gaslighting relationship, right? And so the way that you're looking at the picture is not as clear as you might have been before the gaslighting starts. So how do you even see that what's going on is gaslighting?
Yeah.
And so people come in because, like, I don't know what's going on. I think there's something wrong, but my husband said it's me. He threw something at me, but he says that was just a response to my being late. And I want to know from you, Dr. Stern, whether the problem was that I was late or the problem was that he threw something at me. And not being able to tell for herself that no matter who's right in that situation, she's in danger. And that's not okay for him to throw something at her.
Right.
Yeah.
I do see people who are gaslit, and usually they're females in relationships. And, it is a problem. I see it as a problem more. It seems more of a male issue, narcissism and antisocial kind of traits. I don't know the statistics in front of me, but would you say that most of the patients you're seeing to help out of these situations are women?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think of it as, women have been socialized certainly for many years. I know things are changing now with changing roles, but women are taught to accommodate, where our empathy is really encouraged. We are spending more time in someone else's shoes than our own. And we're pleasers. We want to have a shared vision, depending on how we feel about the person who we're married to, let's say, or we're connected to. It may be very compelling to have that fantasy. We see the world together in the same way, and he's my soulmate, and or I'm dependent on him, and we're joined at the hip, and I just don't know how I could get out. So there's a lot of motivation to join
with other people. Yeah. Well, empathy would imply more of an other versus self orientation, and there's of course a caretaking aspect for women that's partially biological, partially, largely probably cultural scripts too. I mean, there's a big kind of melange of things to go together to make one's social orientation. Are there particular attachment styles that you see? What's the role of attachment in these kind of relationships?
I think that when you have an insecure attachment, anything that destabilizes that is going to be difficult for you. And so you'll look to be that good person so that you can shore up that attachment. One thing that I really noticed is that not all gaslighters are malicious, malevolent, or even intentional. Sometimes gaslighting is what you've learned to do by watching other people. Sometimes gaslighting is what you've learned to do by receiving the gaslighting yourself, and that becomes the way that relational dynamic works. When somebody's out of control, you just go somewhere else in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so people say, are all gaslighters bad, or are all gaslighters sociopaths, or are they narcissists? And no, they're not. Sometimes I've definitely worked with couples where the woman will say, this thing is called gaslighting and I don't like it. And you're trying to undermine my confidence. And sometimes people will say, I'm not going to say it's a big percentage, but sometimes people will say, I'm so sorry. So when we were going back to how you leave, sometimes you as a woman or as a gaslightee can say, I've been reading about this, or my friend noticed this, and I notice that every time I ask you a question or ask you to take responsibility for something, you pivot the conversation, you twist the conversation and start blaming me or undermining me. And I just read this article, and that's called gaslighting. And I wonder if we can talk about it. And if your partner says, well, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm willing to read it. Or, oh my God, I didn't realize I was doing that to you. Let's talk about that. Or please tell me when I'm doing that to you, and I'll try not to do that. Or I guess that's what I learned. And as opposed to, there you go again, with that psychology crap, there's a problem you have that you can't have a straight conversation. You have to bring in, what your analyst said. Did your analyst tell you that last week? Or, no, I'm not a gaslighter. You just don't know how to think straight.
Well, okay, so that's kind of a litmus test to see what you're working with, or for you as a therapist to kind of like diagnose what that other partner, the gaslighter, is. Whether or not they have like a disorganized attachment style, I guess, or a narcissism, perhaps, narcissistic personality structure, or if they've learned this particular way to communicate that's not very effective, or is harsh and kind of punitive.
Or learn that this is a way to control someone when you're feeling anxious, or this is a way that you can gather yourself when you're feeling fragmented. So very often, like, think about it, when a woman says to a man, I don't know what's going on, but I just haven't been able to reach you. Or anybody says that to their partner, because I've definitely had male patients say to a female patient, I haven't been able to reach you. You're out of town. You tell me you're working, but I don't know. You never answer your phone. And when we're together, you answer your phone all the time. When that partner says you're paranoid, how would you respond to that? Like, dancing into that tango means, I don't know, maybe you're right. Maybe I am paranoid. Mm-hmm. Okay, forget it. Never mind. I know you love me, and I'm just going to drop it. I forgot where we started this particular.
Well, we're talking about that slippery slope, and also like the difference between a personality style, or I should say, maybe a personality disorder versus somebody who's just, a communication style to control someone because they feel out of control and fragmented. Yeah. So the person might have a healthy sense of narcissism, but they get fragmented, frazzled, anxious, defense mechanism. It's a defense mechanism rather than a manipulative, pathological way to control someone completely and entirely.
Right. So I'm anxious in that moment because you just caught me. Right. So I just want to control that moment. I want to manage my own feelings by gaslighting you. So I don't have to deal with where I actually was for the last 2 nights. Mm-hmm. I can just blame it on you and go into that territory. And then we're talking about you and your paranoia. Why are you so paranoid? Right. I love you. Right. And so I think it's more. And I've found in my practice that it's more helpful for people to talk about the behavior than to talk about a personality disorder or narcissism, because what you see and what you feel is a result of the behavior in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then and how you are praising the moment. So if I'm looking at you and I'm thinking, this is my boyfriend or my husband, and you love me, and you're telling me that I'm paranoid, and you look at me with a concerned or an angry expression, either one of those will work. Say, you're very paranoid. And then all of a sudden I'm defending myself and saying, well, I don't know if I'm paranoid. And then you get concerned and you're talking about how, well, why would you be so paranoid? You know, I love you. Then I'm working with the interaction. Whether you're a narcissist, whether you have other personality issues, isn't of concern to me. It's not that helpful. Mm-hmm. It's helpful maybe when you take a step back and you're looking at the relationship, but in the moment, looking at what is he doing? And so when you think about how do you leave a relationship, what do those conversations look like? What did he say? What did I say? Mm-hmm. Do we ever really finish the conversation that I start with my feelings or a complaint or a question?
Mm-hmm. So the reason people stay in these relationships is it's a slippery slope that gets them to this doubting themselves, right? And also the presentiment to have an other versus self orientation or a more empathic joining with the person kind of approach to life. And hence why it's probably statistically most of this is, most people who are suffering under these kind of circumstances are women in intimate relationships. What about work relationships? How does this manifest in a work relationship?
In a work relationship, and I actually have I thought you would ask me that for some reason. So I just took a list of things it might sound like at work, right? So first of all, at work, just as at home, there are other what I call conditions of vulnerability. And if you're easily swayed by someone who seems so certain is one condition of vulnerability. And that definitely happens at work. If you have a big stake in being appreciated or understood, and at work, people do have a stake in that. Mm-hmm. If you are more comfortable relying on someone else's opinion than your own, which may happen at work. If you have a hard time acknowledging that someone is treating you badly and you want to explain it away, well, I know about this guy that he had a controlling mother. And so, he doesn't like to feel like anybody's controlling him. So he's not treating me badly. He's just reacting to something that's going on for him psychologically. When you want to preserve your good opinion of the gaslighter, you're interested in looking at the picture in a certain way. And so you're not going to see, for example, I'm reminded now of the old experiment where the instructions are you're watching a group of people throw a basketball around. The selective attention study. Do you know that study?
Yeah, it was the man with the gorilla just walks through them, but you're pointing people towards the basketball and that activity, so people don't even notice it until you point it out to them. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And so I see that a lot. That kind of cognitive selective attention that they are. But he's so attractive, or he's my soulmate, as I said, or he didn't mean it. So you're looking at his psychology and explaining it away rather than looking at, wait a minute, do you like that? How do you feel when someone?
Yeah.
And so what you're actually paying attention to in that moment is something that can come up early on in therapy and begin to be healing. And when you, I know you asked me about the workplace, and I'm looking for that list. Oh, I found it. But one thing that I think is important is that both in the workplace and in personal relationships, it's often a third person or somebody outside the group or the dynamic who says to you, wait a minute, that sounds nuts. What do you mean he told you that you shouldn't make eye contact with people in the street? And that will help your relationship. Because when you make eye contact, you're inevitably flirting, he said. And you don't think that you're flirting, but maybe he's right. If you don't make eye contact, then you can't possibly be flirting. So that makes sense. So helping people to untangle what seems to make sense in a gaslighting relationship that otherwise would sound, that's nuts. Like you can't make eye contact in the street.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And what about at work?
So at work, it sounds like here's a list of things that you could hear at work. No, I never said that. Really? You care about that? Don't you think you're just way too sensitive with your colleagues? This is a workplace. This is not a therapy session. No one wants you on the team. Everyone complains about your lack of judgment. I'm hearing that all the time. I don't know why you're making such a big deal about this. It was a non-event. I asked for that yesterday. Don't you even remember that conversation? It's not the first time that your memory's been in question. Perhaps you need a few days off to de-stress if you're having so much trouble keeping your deadlines. Did you actually train for this job? Those are all phrases that people could hear in the workplace. Mm. And I think the red flags in the workplace are similar to what they might be in a relationship. Like you're constantly second guessing yourself. You're constantly asking yourself, am I demanding too much? Am I too sensitive? Am I being paranoid? You often feel confused or crazy. You may suddenly feel socially isolated. You're ruminating about conversations. You leave your boss's office or your colleague's office and you're thinking, wait a minute, I said this and he said that. I went in to ask about my promotion and he didn't really say anything about it. But when I was in the meeting, I suddenly felt confused. Like he was telling me I was doing a great job, but we never really talked about the promotion. So you're going over and over the conversation. You're always apologizing. You seem to have a good job and everything's going well, but you feel miserable much of the time because of your interactions. And I think, and you feel burned out and exhausted. So one of the things that happens as a result of suffering the gaslight effect is that you do feel exhausted and burnt out. And it's hard to experience joy. It's hard to make decisions. It's hard to keep up relationships. And then as a result of that, you're also more vulnerable to gaslighting because the narrower your world, the more powerful that channel of information gaslighter becomes.
Yeah. Well, what are some, can you maybe describe ways a person can kind of work themselves out, like from your book that you go into some detail, maybe one or two of them?
Well, one of them is to begin to write down conversations and to really understand, like, what was I feeling at that moment? And what stopped me? Like when I said to you, well, where were you last night? And you told me that I was paranoid. Like, what was I feeling in that moment? And what stopped me from saying to you, wait a minute, maybe I am paranoid, but I still don't know where you were last night. Can you answer the question? What are the barriers that get in my way in those moments with you? And if you want to take it deeper, where did that come from in my past? In those moments when you're trying to leave a relationship, and particularly when you're trying to limit the gaslighting or change the dynamic, it may not be in those moments the right time to unpack your past, but it certainly can be helpful because when you go back, if you can take a step away or you have some time alone, which I always recommend, like take some time off, even if it's a coffee break, that's regular, just to be by yourself and get in touch with your own feelings. You may say, well, wait a minute. This is how my parents treated each other. I recognize that kind of deflection. My dad did it all the time. He's not my dad. Maybe I can do something different. So it can liberate you in certain ways. Mm-hmm. But it is that in those dynamics that I think you can helpfully write down, actually, conversation started, and then here is what I said. And just a few minutes into it, we're not talking about where you were anymore. Mm-hmm. And so am I feeling crazier and crazier as the conversation goes on? Okay, so what can I do? What can I say to myself that is going to get me out of that conversation so that I can have a moment to think about it? And maybe it's something like, I really want to talk about this with you, but I can't right now. I feel too flooded. Or we're having the same conversation. It's not going anywhere. Can we write it down together? Mm-hmm. Maybe we can't because you're just going to slam me with some gaslighting statement. And maybe we can because you can see and you have some empathy that I'm really hurting and you're not aware of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to check in with your, what I call in my book, flight attendants, the feelings in your body, your friends who know who you are and can say, this doesn't sound like you. Or, wait a minute, 1 second ago, you told me that you didn't like it. And then you also said, but it's okay to tolerate it. So no, it's not okay. Right. Bad dreams, other kinds of indicators in your own life that things are not going well, not being able to make a decision. Mm-hmm. Wait a minute, I can't even decide what movie I want to go see. Maybe it sounds, well, I don't know. How does it sound to you to focus on that interaction and really unpack it and mine it for, do I have the skills I need? Did I have the skills then? What could I have done differently? What was I aware of? And what are the barriers to my acting in a different way? In my book, I talk a lot, or I leave a lot of room for people to think about the specific instance for themselves and what they need more of, or what are some barriers in their way.
Okay. What about the non-pathological, let's say non-pathologically narcissistic gaslighter? Are there things they can do to correct what they're doing? Can they catch themselves in the moment? I'm sure that's part of what you do with couples, to change that and using some kind of unpacking of the dynamics of the relationship. But if anybody's listening in and they feel like maybe they are, they use this a lot to try to control situations, what could they do to stop what they're doing? And
again, it's about checking in with feelings or mm-hmm. going back and looking to see, wait a minute, what might I have been feeling when she says, where have you been for the last couple of nights?
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a long time. So I think, but I'm laughing because it is a long time not to check in with a spouse or a significant other, but go ahead.
But I think in those moments, if I confront you, so I would say it depends, because for the gaslighter in particular, because if you are intent on lying to your spouse or your partner or your colleague, checking in with your feelings may just result in your staying firm in your stance. I feel, I'm trapped, I'm caught, I'm uncomfortable, but I can't tell her the truth.
Right.
So how do you get out of telling the truth? You turn it on her. You make her second guess herself. You blame, you tell her she's crazy in some way. But if it's a question of that's not quite as heavy. Like we're arguing about who's going to take the car to go to a meeting at night. And there's only one car. And you're insisting that my meeting is not important and that it's quite obvious that nobody really cares if I'm there anyway. And that I never get asked a question. Nobody ever calls me after the meeting. But some way in which you're undermining me. If you would go back in that moment and check in with your feelings, maybe your feeling was simply, I'm just pissed off that I'm not going to get the car, or I'm concerned that I'm going to let my colleagues down, or I'm irritated that I have to deal with this. And so it's easier in that moment to turn the conversation on someone else. And if you can catch yourself in that moment, you can say, you know what, I'm really irritated about this. So it's about the skills of emotional intelligence. It's about recognizing that you're having a feeling, understanding what that feeling is, labeling it, expressing it, and then doing something to manage it. I'm really irritated about this. Can we figure out another way to have this conversation? What can we do about this?
Yeah. Okay. And so a lot of what probably unpacks for, I would assume, men in therapy is just being able to increase emotional intelligence that they're on the cusp of having if they just take two steps back from rather than blame shifting, right?
And there is an app that we at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence worked on and developed with Ben Silberman, the former creator, owner of Pinterest. And he has provided the center with this project with a great deal of funding. And so we collaborated on this wonderful app, and it's called How We Feel. And How We Feel can teach you, can help you expand your vocabulary, can teach you all the skills of emotional intelligence, and really help you to, in those moments, check in with yourself or get in the habit of checking in with yourself.
Okay, great. Well, I'll make sure that there's some information about the app, but could you explain the book before you take off? Could you maybe plug your book a little bit?
So the Gaslight Effect Recovery Guide is an amazing, if I do say so myself, resource for anyone struggling with a relationship, because it not only presents information about gaslighting and how you got into the relationship, perhaps, or why you're staying in the relationship, perhaps, but how you can get out, and gives you strategies and tools and many things to think about and to write about, so that it's a journey that you're taking with yourself to understand and manage and then make decisions about a relationship that's really hurting you, or that you're not sure about. Do you stay? Do you try to shift the gaslighting from within, or do you leave?
Okay, excellent. And that's from Rodale Press, I take it, and people can find you on the web as well.
People can find me at robinstern.com.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Stern. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Scott, for elevating this topic. It's so important.
Thank you for listening. Did you know the Psychology Talk podcast is all over the World Wide Web? Well, not entirely all over, but we are on social media and we do have a website. Pop over to www.psych-talk.com to find out more about the show. All material is copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. Opinions of our guests are not necessarily those of the host or the show. Material is provided for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.